Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. Okay. I really need a new webcam. Fun fact about me, or about the channel, I have used the same webcam since I started the channel, alright? So maybe it's just time I buy a new webcam. But it's brought me through all of this, but I've had some trouble with the webcam just kind of going off every now and then. I think it's just because I need to replace it. So if there are any, I don't like to do any, I like to do all the reactions in one take. I don't like to splice things. I feel like it makes me, one, it's more work, and two, I feel like it makes me less authentic if I do that. So I hope I don't have to do that. If I do, you know why. Come on, webcam. Old Faithful. Preemptive like history buffs. The last time I react, I've seen a few history buff videos. I've seen We Were Soldiers. I've seen Waterloo. Zulu. But I reacted to, oh my god, words are difficult right now. The Patriot, and I got some interesting replies, and that was fun. And I love that movie. But Braveheart, guys, is one of my top 5 favorite movies ever. If not top 5, definitely top 10. I am aware of a lot of historical inaccuracies, okay? I don't love it as just a historian loving pure historical accuracy. I know there are some inaccuracies, okay? But I love this film, all right? Just as a film on its own. And I have a feeling my heart is going to be broken a little bit while in this video here. So the original link to the video from History Buff, such a great channel. If you haven't seen it, please their videos, please check it out. But his channel name is History Buffs. He points out historical things, inaccuracies, positive, negatives in historical films. And I have a strong feeling he is going to react similarly to Braveheart as he did to The Patriot. So I'm ready for my heart to be broken, but regardless of any inaccuracies, just even if it was purely fictional, I love Braveheart. I freaking love it. So let me down easy, history buffs. Let's do this, guys. My name's Connor, if you're new. Did I say that stuff? He is one of my favorite intros of any channel. Zulu, Nefertiti, Napoleon, Genghis Khan, Washington, Impaler, Henry, Elizabeth, Julius. This is a great transition. Such a good channel. I have also seen his video, History Buffs video on Master and Commander, which is also one of my favorite historical films. And he seemed to have a lot of great things to say there. Also, Gladiator, phenomenal. Waterloo. Real people, by the way. Real people. This is not CGI. I gotta shut up. I just want to say, regardless of what happens, I love Braveheart.
Hello and welcome, History Buffs. My name is Nick Hodges, and I'm excited to give you the review you have all been waiting for, Braveheart. If there is one movie that can drive a history buff absolutely livid, it is this one. It's insanely accurate, and it pains me to say this because I love this period in history, and to see almost all of it stripped away and condensed down to Hollywood fluff is just outrageous.
Stop it. Okay, we're not doing this. Okay, bye, guys. No, I'm here. I'm gonna watch this movie again after this.
And I'm not talking about a few inaccuracies here and there. Almost every single piece of information provided is completely false, which is why I had to make an extra long review to cover up as much as possible. Unfortunately, though, I couldn't cover them all, so I apologize if I left out anything big. So, without further ado, this is Braveheart.
Well, I see as my countrymen here in defiance of tyranny. Fight for them? No! We'll run, and we'll live. If you want to skip my cringy stuff, just skip forward. I run? No. I stay, fight, and you may die. Run, and you'll live. At least for a while. But many years from now, lying in your bed, would you not trade every day, from this day till that, for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell your enemies that you may take our lives, but you'll never take our freedom? Alabacabra! Sorry. Yeah, cringy, I don't care. What news of the North?
I think I may be one of the only people who's not a big fan of this movie. To be honest, I'm actually puzzled as to why it won 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, because it's a pretty generic, run-of-the-mill action-adventure story that we've all seen time and time again. I mean, we start off with a protagonist who simply wants to lead a quiet life on his farm in peace and harmony, insisting to be a reluctant pacifist whilst his country is at the brink of war.
I came back home to raise crops and, God willing, a family.
Actually, what am I talking about? This is a generic, run-of-the-mill Mel Gibson movie.
But if you're asking me, am I willing to go to war with England? Well, then the answer is most definitely no.
It is! Because the next thing that always happens is that the English come in, kill his family, and thus forcing him to take up arms against the English in the name of freedom. It literally is a precursor to the Patriot. It even shares some of the same blood dialogue.
When I get a chance to kill Englishmen.
Where else do I get the opportunity to kill a few redcoats?
In that case, you can forget about this movie even attempting to be accurate.
I'm gonna be holding myself back so hard to not repeat certain lines. You're a madman. Looks like I've come to the right place then. What would you tell me about the current situation? That's it. I'm sorry.
Here we go again with another case of classic Hollywood making compromises with history to drive this stupid cliche plot.
He was a man of peace, living on a quiet farm in North Dakota.
Screw you, man.
Till one day, all hell broke loose.
Tim, we need you. I'm a man of peace. I'm done killing. I want to raise a family. That's just it, Tim. They've got your family. No!
I cannot be the only one who's getting sick and tired of these over-the-top movies playing fast and loose with historical fact. And by fast and loose, I mean by totally making stuff up. After all, it's not enough to stick it to the Englishman. Mel Gibson also had to stick it to the Englishman's wife. And yes, I have total justification in making fun of that romantic subplot, because Princess Isabella couldn't have had an affair with William Wallace since she was 9 years old at the time of his death and was still living in France. So, unless William Wallace was a teleporting pedophile, then
I did not know that. God
struggle to see how this is possible. I mean, like, seriously.
A time-traveling pedophile.
This movie's so full of inconsistencies that it might as well be set in a magical kingdom with dragons and stuff.
You're breaking my heart, man.
It probably would have made more sense.
The question of the historical accuracy of Braveheart is one that always makes me laugh. When we're creating something, when we're in the business of storytelling, we're in a process of myth-making for which the audience, the listeners, are just as crucial as the speakers. They respond to the story in a certain way. I wasn't looking to describe facts or numbers or to quantify.
Same historical accuracy percentage for every film he does, okay? I have no problem with what that writer just said, okay?
Feeling.
It's one of the films that like I remember most from my childhood, and
that I had when
I gotta chill.
Movies had changed my life.
Oh, really? Then why didn't you use that same approach when you wrote and directed We Were Soldiers?
Hollywood.
Seriously, how come that movie was handled in a respectful and mature way to its historical source material, but in Braveheart he wanted to capture a spirit or a feeling or some other such rubbish? And what's funny to me is that he was totally aware of this when he wrote the script. Right at the beginning of the movie, one of the very first lines defends Braveheart from ridicule, almost like it's baiting me to take a shot at it.
Historians from England will say I am a liar, but history is written by those who have hanged heroes.
Well, challenge accepted, my friend, because I most certainly do.
Dang it. That quote from the movie does actually give history buffs a point. Because if the writer did feel that way, then why did he include that?
My father's side of the family are descended from the Clan Robertson of Inches, one of the oldest Highland clans of Scotland, so there. As you can see here in this terribly embarrassing photograph of myself when I was 14, I am wearing my clan's tartan. Now, I certainly take my Scottish roots very seriously, but you'd have to be a special kind of stupid if you think this movie does as well. So the movie begins in 1280 after the death of the Scottish king, Alexander III, and... No, wait. Hold on, that doesn't sound right. Sorry, guys, let me just look this up really quickly. King Alexander reigned from the 6th of July, 1239 to the 19th of March, 1286.
Six years.
Kidding me?
6
They
years.
couldn't even get the sodding dates right. You know, for a movie that's supposed to celebrate Scottish history, they're severely lacking any credibility so far. What excuse could they possibly have for cocking up this early in the movie?
Historians from England will say I am a liar.
Oh, shut the In 1286, the future of the Kingdom of Scotland became uncertain when the King Alexander III died in a horse-riding accident. The problem was that he died without leaving any male heirs, and things only became worse when his granddaughter, Margaret of Norway, died in 1290. Since she was the last of Alexander's heirs, stiff competition arose between the Scottish nobles...
Sorry, how do you die from a horse-riding accident? Like, you just fall off and you break something, and then that gets infected and then you die? Or, like, were you trampled by the horse? Or, like, kicked?
Since she was the last...
I need to stop talking.
Worse when his granddaughter, Margaret of Norway, died in 1290. Since she was the last of Alexander's heirs, stiff competition arose between the Scottish nobles on who would be the next king of Scotland.
Robert the Bruce.
And 14 of them made their claim to the throne. When things started to look like they might escalate into a civil war, the Scots made a terrible mistake of asking the English king, Edward I, to mediate. Now, he had been watching the situation developing in Scotland like a hawk, looking for any signs of weakness.
Nobles are the key to the door of Scotland.
Now, in the movie, King Edward is...
He might be my favorite character in the movie. Well, no, he's not my favorite character. That makes me sound evil. I'm saying that he was played so well by this actor.
Portrayed as...
Are the key to the door of Scotland.
Now, in the movie, King Edward is portrayed as a brutal man, and that's actually a fair depiction. I mean, he was a conqueror. He had fought in an English civil war, been on crusades, and military campaigns in Wales and France. And here came along this perfect opportunity to expand his kingdom with Scotland. So King Edward graciously accepted this request to arbitrate, and out of the two most popular claimants to the crown, which were Robert the Bruce and John Balliol was chosen as the new King of Scotland, but under one condition, that he recognized King Edward and swear fealty to him as Lord Paramount, the feudal superior of the Scottish realm. Reluctantly, the Scots accepted in 1292, but it wasn't long before they regretted that decision, because King Edward started to take advantage by demanding homage to have legal authority over their king, and by heavily taxing them and demanding the Scots provide military service for England's war with France. To the Scottish, this was unacceptable, and they pressured King John Balliol to instead make an alliance with France. The Scots then launched a preemptive strike and invaded England, attacking Carlisle Castle on the 12th of March 1296. Unsuccessfully, I might add. In response, King Edward invaded Scotland and made an example out of the people of Berwick-upon-Tweed for the Scots' attack on Carlisle. He had the town sacked and slaughtered around 8,000 people, almost the entire town's population. Edward's army pushed further into Scotland, taking Dunbar, Edinburgh, and finally Stirling Castle. King John was eventually captured, stripped of his titles, and was imprisoned in the Tower of London. King Edward then installed English viceroys to rule Scotland, and just over a year later, William Wallace's rebellion began in 1297. Now, you might...
Sorry, I'm rewinding just because I didn't really understand all of that.
Finally Stirling Castle. Edward's army pushed further into Scotland, taking Dunbar, Edinburgh, and finally Stirling Castle. King John was eventually captured, stripped of his titles, and was imprisoned in the Tower of London. Okay. King Edward then installed English viceroys to rule Scotland, and just over a year later, William Wallace's rebellion began in 1297. Okay. Now, you might be asking yourself, hey, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense, because in the movie it's implied that the English had occupied
Such a badass scene.
Scotland for decades.
Now is our chance. Now. If we join, we can win. If we win, well, then we'll have what none of us have ever had before. A country of our own.
Well, either this is some sloppy writing or William Wallace is being melodramatic. I like to think it's the former, since I wouldn't want to imagine William Wallace, the hero of Scotland, being too stupid to tell the difference between 2 years and 2 decades.
Unite us. Guys, I should have done this before, but let's do a pee break. I'm sorry. I gotta pee. Be right back. Okay, back. I washed my hands.
Now, not a lot is known about William Wallace. I can honestly say that he has been one of the hardest historical figures I have researched so far. It's almost like he is the Scottish version of Robin Hood, since he has been built up over the centuries as a mythical figure, and this film certainly doesn't give us an idea of who William Wallace really was. This is because the story was largely based off of a poem called The Wallace, written by a man named Blind Harry in 1470. He wrote about William Wallace 165 years after his execution. The movie shrugs this off. You have to know that Blind Harry really did describe William Wallace to be 7 feet tall, and that's not the only inaccurate exaggeration he made. And this was because Blind Harry's poem was written as a propaganda piece and was commissioned by the Scottish nobles at the time to stir up conflict between England and Scotland in order to stop the Scottish king, James III, from making peace with England. So combine that with Randall Wallace, Braveheart's scriptwriter, and you have a film based on more fantasy than truth. So let's start off with who William Wallace really was. In the movie, he's portrayed as a commoner or a farmer, someone who's basically dirt poor and lives off the land. However, he was actually the son of a minor nobleman called Alan Wallace, who never spent a day in his life doing farm work or any other type of manual labor. More than likely, he would have spent his childhood training to be a man-at-arms and received military training. These skills would prove to be extremely important even before the Scottish War for Independence. Records show that he was a younger son, and in those days, the elder son would inherit the father's estate, so William Wallace's career options would have been very limited.
Dang it. I'm the middle child. I wouldn't have gotten in. Yeah, I wouldn't have gotten inheritance. Great.
He could either join the church or he could go off and serve in the army, and there is a strong theory that he might have served as a mercenary in King Edward's War in Wales. His personal steel had an archer's insignia, so he might have been an archer. Now again, this is only conjecture, but this military experience does help explain how Wallace was able to lead a successful resistance movement against the English, a lot more than just having a few sword fighting lessons with his uncle.
Learn to use this. Then I'll teach you to use this.
Okay, guys, can I ask people who are, who dislike this movie on history grounds, if you forget that just think of this as historical fiction, okay? Is it not a great movie? Be honest.
Another interesting thing to know about William Wallace is that he may also have been an outlaw before the war ever started. In 1296, there is a record of him and an English soldier stealing a keg of beer from some lady's house. Typical laddish behavior, I know, but I wanted to point out the difference between the real Wallace and the infallible version we see in the movie. But it is fascinating to see how he goes from being a common thief to the savior of Scotland in just a year. And this brings us to the rebellion at Lanark. In the movie, William Wallace secretly marries a peasant girl called Murren, and the reason for this is to avoid the English enforcing a medieval custom called prima nocta. More than likely, it's just a medieval myth, kind of like the chastity belt.
Maid Mary. A chastity belt?
It's an everlast.
So the next thing that happens is that the English capture Wallace's wife Murren for assaulting the king's soldiers, and the sheriff of Lanark slits her throat to provoke William Wallace to attack. Now, this gets a little complicated, but I'll try to keep it as simple as possible. In Blind Harry's poem, it is mentioned that William Wallace's wife was called Marion Braidfoot and not Murren like it is in the movie, and her death by the sheriff William de Hesselrig was what sparked William Wallace's uprising in the first place and motivated him to fight. Now, it is true that this uprising really did take place, and Wallace, along with his supporters, mortars attacked the English garrison and killed the sheriff. However, the reason why it is actually a bit of a mystery, since Marion Braveheart never existed and Wallace never had a wife. In the first edition of Blind Harry's poem, there is no mention of Marion Braveheart, but she somehow appears in a later edition of the Wallace written 100 years later. The reason for this was because an aristocratic family, the Baileys of Lamington, paid someone to include Marion Braveheart into the poem in order for them to claim to be her descendants. This was quite common practice at the time, and it's this version that seems to have inspired Braveheart. So, if there was no Marion Braveheart, then why did William Wallace attack the English garrison? Like I said, no one really knows for sure, but there are a few theories. One being that Wallace was actually under orders from another man called Richard of Lundy, who organized the attack. Another being that it may have been over a land dispute when the English confiscated the Wallace's family's land, and by doing so would effectively make them outlaws. If that's the case, then I'm sure that William Wallace felt like he had nothing left to lose. First his country, and now his family were under threat from English oppression. So, after his attack on Lanark, Scots began to flock to him and hope that now the time had finally come to fight for their freedom.
The English are advancing an army towards Stirling to the nobles' rally. Robert the Bruce and most of the others will not commit to battle, but word is spread, and the Highlanders are coming down on their own. Aye, in droves of hundreds and thousands. Are you ready for a war?
So now we're on to the Battle of Stirling. Alright, cool. So let's get the obvious stuff out of the way before we tackle what's really wrong with this battle. I just want to let you know, Scots of the 13th century didn't wear blue face paint. This is obviously borrowed from a fierce tribe called the Picts, who lived in Scotland and fought the Romans over 1,000 years before Stirling.
When they paint their faces in the blue woad, it is more than just a decoration. It is a sacred rite. To the Picts, it means they'd sooner die than fail.
I seriously doubt that the heavily Catholic Scots would want to affiliate themselves to their pagan ancestors in any way. Another thing I obviously have to mention are the kilts. Scots wouldn't be wearing kilts in Stirling, or for that matter, anywhere until the 17th century. They would actually be wearing very similar clothing and armor to their English counterparts. But here they are, wearing kilts with little to no armor against an English army fully clad in armor, and by some miracle, they win. How? They're practically wearing
Don't show the shot in the butt.
nothing, and some of them aren't even carrying real weapons. Like, honestly, what is that? Is that a stick?
Farmer
Look,
tool.
mate, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but I don't think you're taking this very seriously.
All right, lads. I'm not dying for these bastards. Let's go home.
Glad to see this guy has some common sense at least. Oh, wait, no. Mel Gibson has to make a speech first. This should be good.
This is the best speech of any movie ever. Stop it. I'm so... because I have a bias towards this movie, I've loved it forever. Okay? It came out 3 years after I was born, I think. When did it come out? 95? 2 years after I was born? And so I'm struggling between knowing what History Buff's channel is about, is calling out historical inaccuracies in historical movies. And then it keeps battling with my thought of, like, it's not a documentary, though. But I have to respect History Buff and History Buffs and how he approaches these videos, so...
This guy has some common sense at least. Oh, wait, no. Mel Gibson has to make a speech first. This should be good.
That they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom.
So despite having no armor, being outnumbered, and being...
What does Al-Bugha mean?
...poorly ill-equipped, is through the power of freedom that the Scots win the day. Ah, so if only Native Americans believed in freedom, then maybe they would have won.
Yeah, let's not talk about that.
I guess they didn't believe in freedom hard enough. I mean, look at this. There is no tact whatsoever with this battle. The Scots and the English assemble on an open field, and they simply smash into each other, and eventually, somehow, the Scots win. Okay, so enough of that rubbish. How did the Scots really win? Well, the biggest inaccuracy I've yet to mention is that the Battle of Stirling is actually called the Battle of Stirling Bridge, and yet there is no bridge to be found, even though this bridge played an extremely important part in winning this battle.
That's fair.
You see, unlike in the movie, movie, the Scots actually used clever tactics instead of clever speeches, and they chose to fight in Stirling because of its strategic importance. If you wanted to conquer the Highlands, then you had to cross Stirling Bridge, which was made of wood and extremely narrow, only wide enough to allow the English to cross 2 by 2.
So like a 300 scenario?
On September the 11th, 1297, an English army of
9/11.
10,000 men began the excruciatingly slow process of crossing the bridge, unaware of the 6,000 Scots hid in the woods to the north. They waited until a third of the army had crossed the bridge before attacking, catching the English completely by surprise. The knights in their heavy armor were hemmed in and had no freedom of movement on the slippery mud. The Scots were able to pull them off their horses and cut them to pieces. William Wallace's men were also able to take control of the bridge, blocking off access for escape and reinforcements. The English, having nowhere to go, attempted to swim across the river, but due to their heavy armor, many of them drowned. The battle was over in an hour, and William Wallace and the Scottish rebels were victorious. After the Battle of Stirling, the movie shows William Wallace being knighted and declared Guardian of Scotland, its de facto leader, second only to the king. Then he declares his next move to win his country independence.
We have beaten the English, but they'll come back. Because you won't stand together. What will you do? I will invade England and defeat the English on their own ground.
In reality, he was knighted and became Guardian only after his invasion of England. And I also have to mention that during his invasion, he never got anywhere close to York. The reason for this is because it was hundreds of miles away from Scotland, and without steady supplies and professional siege equipment, there would have been no chance for him to take the city. So instead, he began a pillaging and burning campaign by hitting English towns just south of the Scottish border. Eventually, King Edward returned from his campaign in Flanders to deal with William Wallace personally, leading an army of 12,000 men and 2,000 mounted knights against Wallace's army of 8,000 men and only a few hundred nobles as their cavalry. Oh, by the way, I just want to quickly point out before I go into the actual battle, there was no incident where the Irish conscripts shake hands and swap sides with the Scots. I can think of no other reason for this being included in the film other than the filmmakers wanting to give the English the finger. So anyway, fearing the English heavy
I thought he was going to say other than just giving the Scots a better chance.
Cavalry, rather than the filmmakers wanting to give the English the finger. So anyway, fearing the English heavy cavalry, Wallace had his men adopt a new formation called a schiltron. His pikemen were arranged into 4 giant circles with their long pikes extended outwards, bristling like a hedgehog. If any cavalry were to charge at them, this is what would happen. For a while, this tactic worked in forcing the English knights to keep a distance, but at some point in the battle, the Scottish nobles fled, leaving William Wallace and his men to their fates.
As a trick, right?
Now, in the movie, this is portrayed to be a sinister betrayal involving a bribe from King Edward, but...
Oh, that was from a previous thing.
Now, in the movie, this is portrayed to be a sinister betrayal involving a bribe from King Edward, but more than likely, they simply saw this battle as unwinnable. I mean, there were only 200 to 300 mounted nobles facing against 2,000 English knights, so they probably just didn't see the point in fighting for a lost cause.
Hey, I'm all about noble death. Pointless noble death, on the other hand.
Yep, I'm sure they saw the same way too. Anyway, so once the Scottish nobles ran away, that's when King Edward unleashed his new secret weapon, the longbow. With Wallace's schiltron exposed and vulnerable without cavalry support, the English archers were able to move up to almost point-blank range and unleashed a hail of arrows decimating the Scots. The schiltrons eventually collapsed, and as the Scots fled, the English heavy cavalry charged in and cut them down. Falkirk was a total defeat, and the Scottish were wiped out. And one last thing to mention was that as William Wallace fled the battle, there was no big reveal of Robert the Bruce betraying William Wallace, since he wasn't even at the battle. In fairness, though, to the movie, Robert the Bruce was known to swap sides, but he never betrayed William Wallace directly. Because if he had, then why would William Wallace resign as Guardian of Scotland in September 1298 in favour of Robert the Bruce taking his place? So the next thing that happens in the movies, we see Wallace go on a killing spree, taking revenge on the Scottish nobles who had betrayed him in Falkirk, and I think it's pretty obvious by this point that never actually happened either, because William Wallace had more important things on his mind, like the liberation of his country, rather than taking some petty revenge that doesn't solve.
Okay, that scene was so cool, badass though, and that like these people who fled like were sure William Wallace would die. And then he comes back and they see him and they're like, oh crap. and but I get it. He's historical perspective.
His mind,
Voice
like the
crack.
liberation of his country, rather than taking some petty revenge that doesn't solve anything. So instead, William Wallace leaves Scotland on a diplomatic mission to France to meet King Philip to ask for French
Petty
support.
revenge.
This goes on for years, but ultimately proves fruitless in the end. In 1304, Wallace returns to Scotland to continue the fight until he is finally captured by the English and brought to London in 1305.
You stand in taint of high treason.
Against whom?
Against your king. Have you anything to say?
Never in my whole life did I swear allegiance to him.
It matters not. He is your king.
Shortly after, William Wallace was found guilty and was sentenced to death. What's quite remarkable, though, is that this is the part of the movie they actually toned down how...
Oh my god, the part, though, where he's about to get the final death blow and he sees his, murdered wife is, like, this movie is so good. I'm not saying the historical inaccuracies that he's pointing out are wrong, but...
how horrific his execution really was. You'd think that the guy who would later direct one of the most horrific torture movies of all time would jump at this opportunity. So, instead, I'll tell you, but be warned, this is pretty graphic. First, he was dragged naked through the streets at the heels of a horse. Then they hung him almost to the point of death before being released. Then they sliced off his genitals and cut into his belly and pulled out his entrails before finally beheading him. Then they cut off his arms and legs, and each limb was displayed in Newcastle, Berwick, Stirling, and Perth.
What did they do with the torso, though? So you place his head somewhere, his arm, other arm, leg, other leg. What do you do with the torso?
His head was stuck on a pike in London Bridge. So, with all this being done to him, do you really think he was at all capable to be able to shout this stupid line?
I don't care! It's so good! Stop it!
I kinda doubt it. Overall, I'd have to say that Braveheart does a terrible job at portraying Scottish history, and I personally feel that his countless inaccuracies actually cheapen what William Wallace really did. In my opinion, the real
It wouldn't have had the effect.
man and his great deeds are far more interesting than the infallible Jesus figure that's presented on screen. And it bums me out to think that there are some people who will walk away from this movie thinking that all of this actually happened.
No, but it would not become the phenomenon of a movie that it was without it.
Well, that about wraps it up. My
great.
name is Nick Hodges, and
Thanks,
thanks
Nick.
for watching History Buffs. And remember, if you like the show, help the channel grow. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button, and let me know in the comments.
I'm just going to do an extra. I'm going to unsubscribe and then do a resubscribe to just show it again. Unlike, relike, comment. Great video as always, Nick. But I still love Braveheart crying emoji. Cry.
Comment section what you thought about Braveheart, and of course,
Subscribing, liking, commenting, it really does help out, guys.
what historical movie shall I review next? In the meantime, check out the History Buffs Twitter and Facebook pages for new updates. Until then, have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Hey, we're almost at Christmas, well, a month away. So obviously, I love Nick Hodges' his channel, History Buffs. I obviously refute nothing that he said historically, pointing out historical inaccuracies. But this movie was so good. I've never, like, this isn't like me being like a manly man. I've never cried to a movie before, and I know that a lot of people do. And but this movie gets me emotional. It does. It's so well made. And so it's still one of my favorite movies of all time. But I learned a lot of things that I didn't know before. So I love y'all. Hope you're all doing well. I'm probably going to watch Braveheart tonight before I go to bed, or maybe fall asleep halfway through. I don't know. I'm kind of tired. It is 10:05 p.m. Love y'all. Hope you're all doing well. Would appreciate any comments below. Disagree with me, agree with me, point out stuff I said you think was bullcrap. I love nothing more. Start the conversations. And hopefully I'll see you guys next video. We'll keep on learning. Bye, guys.